Warning, some viewers may find this content disturbing, viewer discretion is advised. Dear deep-sea fishers of Reddit, what's the strangest thing you've seen, heard on the open ocean? I was fishing off the coast of Malaysia in the middle of the night. Suddenly, the night sky brightened and I saw a bright glowing orb appear to the bow. The orb moved slowly across the sky, leaving a bright yellow trail and seemed to have sparks coming off it for about 20 seconds before disappearing into the night. After getting back to shore, I learned that it was a retired Japanese satellite re-entering the atmosphere. I do a lot of night fishing off of SC and FL. I get a lot of fish that are bitten in half by sharks. Some of them had to have been very, very large. When you reel in a large sport fish's head like some kind of sequel to The Old Man and the Sea and realize the shark is close to half the size of your boat miles and miles offshore, essentially in the middle of nowhere, you get more than a little freaked out. I'm a diver. We were doing a night dive on the Great Barrier Reef when we came up to a cave-like structure, really just a rock formation, which is known for turtles. We shine our flashlights inside and see these huge fucking flippers. In there was a 100-year-old turtle about the size of a small car, in diameter. This isn't anything like the supernatural stories that you were probably after, but I found it very strange. I was sitting in a little boat off Gran Canaria once, when I heard a strange whirring noise, like when kids stick playing cards through the spokes on their bike. I heard it a few times and wondered what it was. And then it hit me. It was a flying fish. It literally hit me, and then floundered around the boat for a few seconds before I picked it up and hurled it back. Those things are goddamn weird. Its wings were gross. I had a friend who was stranded in a rowboat for a couple of days. He got pretty dehydrated, and later told us of these wild hallucinations of beautiful female water spirits encouraging him to join them in the water. It was strange because he was one of those no-nonsense guys who didn't believe in the supernatural, but he said these things were so real to him. My dad and I were fishing off the Florida Keys. We had our anchor out and been fishing for about an hour. 15 minutes later the boat gets bumped and we rock a little bit. My dad jokes saying looks like Jaws is after us, better stay away from the edges. 10 seconds after him saying that the boat begins moving backwards, we are being towed, by our anchor line that's in the water. Whatever has it is now dragging the boat backwards, slowly getting faster, and our boat get pulled under too. Next thing I hear is no fucking way as my dad drops his pole, runs from the front to the back, grabs a knife and cuts the anchor line. After that we decided that fishing was not in the cards that day. I had a friend who would go deep sea fishing and stay out at sea for days at a time. He told me that at times he would hear some of the most bizarre, unearthly noises ever out there at night, and assured me that there must be things out there we have no idea of. Considering we apparently know more about what's on the moon than we know about what's in our own oceans, I'm inclined to agree with him. I'm not a fisherman but a sailor who was racing in a yacht race off the California coast many years ago. We had finished the race in Santa Barbara, and a few of us had volunteered to sail the boat back up to San Francisco where we had started. We were off of Point Conception one night at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Me and a buddy of mine were on watch and talking to stay awake. He was steering and I was leaning against the doghouse looking after him. We talking about something or other when all of a sudden it became daylight. Bright daylight. All I remember were the saucers of his eyes looking back at me to say, WTF. I imagined I looked the same to him because I was absolutely shocked. Then in about 2 seconds, the light faded to the horizon on our right, and we witnessed a rocket taking off from Vandenberg Air Force Base. We watched it ascend into the night sky, and once we saw that it had jettisoned its first stage, we started to joke nervously about the odds of it landing on us. It didn't, and me and my buddy will always remember those 3 to 4 minutes as one of the most singular experiences we've ever had. We had fun telling the rest of the crew about it the next day. They were pissed that they missed it. I was on a dive boat off the coast of the Big Island in Hawaii last week. It was after dark and a pod of dolphins was spending a lot of time playing around off our stern. They were pretty interested in us, it seemed, since every once in a while you could see a head pop up and just sort of look at us for a few seconds. Pretty much everyone was hanging out on the dive platform on the stern when suddenly this huge manta ray comes right up to the surface about 5 feet away from the boat. It was easily 10 feet wide. It did a quick flip and was gone in a few seconds. It wasn't too freaky as we'd been night diving with them a few nights before that. But I could see how someone who wasn't aware of them would get really freaked out. The ocean has a lot of weird stuff in it. Went calabash fishing last year off Mitrel Beach. About 8 miles out in open water. We were just sitting there trolling at a slow rate when we heard this humming noise. It rattled the boat a good bit. I'd kiff it was under it or nearby or what it was really. But it wasn't loud. It went on for maybe 20 to 30 seconds, then it was gone. Everyone heard it and said something about it. Couldn't have been the boat. The boat didn't sound like that. Pretty weird. I have been out in the open ocean, no land or other boats around, and the sea was perfectly calm on a clear day. Our boat was only small and it was not moving at all. It was perfectly still, there was no wind, the water surface looked like glass. It was eerie and slightly disturbing. Only comfort was I was not alone and we were not a sailboat. Late to the party etc. Not my story but rather my granddad's, who was a chief engineer on trawler ships operating out of Hull. Was fishing at night of the coast of Norway in the 70s I believe when a call came on radio, worth nothing. It was an open secret all the radio operators on the trawlers worked for the government and also had sonar equipment to listen for USSR subs, to evacuate a 100 or so mile area, and if the trawlers could not get their nets up in time to GTFO then they should just cut them free, which is a very expensive thing to do when you have dozens of miles of nets out in the water. On the way out my granddad's trawler and other trawlers in the area saw a massive white flash on the horizon. After returning to Hull it was discovered a ship called the Gull had never returned and had lost all radio contact around time of this flash. Fast forward 20 or so years later and the wreckage of the Gull was discovered and officially sank because of a waste flow pipe being overwhelmed by a massive wave that flooded the lower compartments of the ship and sent her to the bottom. Rather interestingly, there was no human remains found on or near the ship nor any equipment, food, bedding etc., and all the windows had been blown outwards along with a hole about 3 meters across through the middle of the ship with all the metal work being twisted upwards towards the sky. My granddad always insisted up to his death that the sea that night was as still as a pond and that his radio operator was fairly sure the GTFO warning came from the Gull. As well, around the time of the Gull's sinking 16 unknown graves were created and filled in Murmansk, Russia. Another one of his favorite stories was that one day the engine for hauling in the nets was redlining and came very close to exploding, so had to be shut off as they assumed the nets had got stuck on the bottom. A few minutes later a Soviet sub surfaced behind them with the nets stuck to the periscope, complete with a bunch of very pissed off Soviet sailors armed with guns who unhooked the nets and disappeared back under the water. It was a known tactic that Soviet subs tried to sit under the trawlers and use them as cover to get out into the Atlantic, hence a lot of the ships having government-paid radio operators on board. My dad owns a fishing boat, so we used to go offshore fishing very often when I was younger. I have a few not so creepy stories. First one was on our trip in the Florida Keys. We were maybe 30 miles offshore, no land or other vessels in sight. We were hauling ass away from some quickly approaching storm cloud when I saw a final cloud appear. It was kind of eerie being an 8-year-old and seeing this shit a few thousand feet behind you, knowing that if it got close enough to us and we didn't make it, no one would ever know for a long time and there's nothing we can do about it. Another time, when I was about 10, we were trolling for fish 40 miles or so off the coast of Bimini, Bahamas, and this large lump floated within a few feet of our boat. It was a dead sea turtle, a pretty big one too. We gaffed it, flipped it over in the water, and there was a huge baseball-sized hole through its underside, and it went all the way through its body until it reached its shell area. It was like a neat cylinder had been carved out of its body, and it looked flat black. I don't know if it was just rotting, but it almost looked charred. Turtle also had numerous hooks and cut lines coming out of its mouth, which is pretty normal for dead ones. We set it loose, still no idea what happened to it. This last story I thought I had dreamt or something until I asked my dad about it recently and he confirmed it. I was around the same age as my last two stories, and we were offshore fishing for mahi pretty much all day. I don't remember if we were on the Gulf side or Atlantic side, but the water was seriously deep and blue. We must have been many miles offshore, and looking at the sonar I remember it being much deeper than 2,000 feet. Anyway, about midday, bored 10-year-old me was sitting on the roof of our center console, and I see this dark shape about 20 feet under the surface. It was seriously huge and definitely not a whale or anything. It was man-made, a gigantic gas submarine, and it was right next to our boat. Like 20 feet away. It stayed next to us for about 60 seconds, then submerged slowly and went on its way. It was so creepy seeing it out in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and knowing that there were people right inside of it. We were deep sea fishing out in a thick fog one morning. Couldn't see more than 10 to 15 feet out from the boat. Fish bite was sporadic. Very quiet except for the water lapping at the sides of the boat and the occasional seabird or distant horn. During a particularly quiet moment, these couple of old guys started talking about the large passenger jet that crashed into the water years ago near where we were fishing and how they only recovered a small number of bodies from the hundreds of dead passengers. Staring down at the calm dark waters and listening to the old guys talk, I couldn't help but imagine the corpses drifting up from the depths and surfacing all around our boat. Imagine seeing the fuselage's silhouette in the fog. Creeped myself out. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more daily videos, and join the Spooky Squad.